Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
We've got myself, Seika, and Rachel,
That's
and
right.
Ian, and they are the co-hosts of this show with me. So today's topic is, what's today's topic?
Vlad Tepes,
Vlad Tepes. Yay!
which I've actually been really looking forward to covering, and I know I've been begging you, Seika, to talk about Vlad Tepes because I think he's just such a really prominent figure, yeah, I think just Vlad as a man, as the real life version of Vlad, and actually him as a myth and as a vampire and being portrayed as Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's version. There's just so much out there about Vlad Tepes. I really just went down the rabbit hole literally when it came to researching him and had a really hard time downsizing the information. I'm sure you know what that's like, Seeker. You go down it and down it and down it because he had such a really fascinating life. And he had a very hard life. And there was a lot of he did a lot of physical fighting. There was a lot of wars. He was constantly fighting for his home seat, his own throne. I think, in a way, I find it quite admirable. I find him quite admirable. I know that might surprise some people. He's been portrayed, because of, I think, Bram Stoker's Dracula and a couple of other vampiric stories that, he's been portrayed as this bad guy. Actually, I discovered in Romania, they actually see Vlad not as a bad guy, as an actual hero in his own country, because all he was doing at that time was trying to defend the people of Romania and against thieves, they were constantly fighting the Ottomans and the Hungarians. They were 1 minute aligned with, the next minute they weren't. So it was so much going on.
It was a pretty tumultuous time then, right? In
Yeah.
general in Europe. And so I think that, and that's kind of why I titled this, Vlad, the man, the myth, and the monster, because there seems to be those categorizations of him.
Yeah.
And we should probably talk about him as the man initially, so that people understand, where he was in history and how his life and what he contributed or what he did played a big part in that part of Europe at that time, because we're talking here it's a period between essentially what we would classify medieval and Renaissance. And so
he was considered a medieval ruler of, and he was the ruler of Wallachia, and he was, and I just want to sort of make it clear and clarify more about who is the man. I'm talking about Vlad Tepes III. His father, his father was the second, and I guess there can be some confusions, obviously. So I just want to make it clear. I'm talking about Vlad Tepes III. His time of birth would have been between 1428 and 1431, and he sadly died in 1476. And they said that they believe that Vlad was most probably born after his father settled in Transylvania in 1429. And he was born the second son of the nobleman Vlad Dracula II, which is what I mentioned.
And I'm going to interject here for a second, because we need to talk about the name. Because Vlad, Tepes is not really his name, right?
Well, Vlad Dracula.
Taylor. So, and so in reality, his father was made a knight in the Order of Dragons.
That's right.
By
That's
Pope,
correct.
or I guess no, I shouldn't say that.
And
It was
so was
Roman
he, right?
Emperor at the time.
Yeah.
And so his father was given the name Dracula or Dracula, right? And then Dracula essentially just means the son of.
That's right.
So
son
much
of.
like you could have Anders' son or Mac or Mick in Scottish and Irish.
Yes, that's exactly it.
At the end, you know, denotes that means he was the son of. But it's important to say, because this really started with his father.
Right. Yes, it definitely did.
It started with his father. And I think the pinnacle of everything that Vlad did in his life was due to what happened to him, his father, and his brother Radu, because they were all taken hostage essentially at a meeting that was supposed to not go in that direction, right?
Yes, it changed everything. It changed Vlad's whole course.
It did.
And, that was an incredibly a real pivotal moment.
And that meeting led to the three of them being taken hostage, but they allowed Dracula Senior to go on the subdication that his sons would remain as part of the, you know,
as part of the bargain, to basically demonstrate Vlad II's loyalty. It was to prove that he was going to be loyal and keep his word. He left his sons there. Yep, right.
So, Ian, what did you find when you were doing your research here? Do you feel that would be a sort of a pivotal point in his life, or do you think there's some other things that maybe led to the later stories of Vlad Dracula?
No, I would agree with that. I will say that when I was doing my research, I found researching Vlad the individual pretty much just as boring as as the vampire novel from Bram Stoker, to be honest with you. I don't know what
Wait a minute.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Do you know, not a lot is known about his mother, Vlad's mother. It's not mentioned a lot, but apparently modern historians identify Vlad's mother as either the daughter or kinswoman of Alexander I of Moldavia, or as his father's unknown first wife.
She is merely a wife and a mother to Vlad Dracula and to Vlad and Radu. And the interesting thing that I find here is it really does start from that point where they were taken. The boys remained with the Ottomans. They were raised by the Ottomans. They were schooled by the Ottomans. They, in arts and culture and things. And it's interesting because Radu went in a different direction than Vlad. And I think Vlad always resented the fact that they were taken. And Radu sort of sided with the Ottomans. And Vlad went on to become more of a warrior and a horseman, and Radu not so much. He just, I think he was a little less strong-willed at that point than Vlad, right? I think Vlad was probably the more strong-willed of character.
Right, again, and Radu was much younger, and I think far more influential. He was about 14 at the time of the hostage, so.
It makes a difference.
Impressionable age, Stockholm syndrome for sure.
Yep,
and they really put Radu on a pedestal, as it were, and worshipped him. And I guess he was very well revered. I think he was known as Radu the Beautiful, and it was
well, and they do touch on that. There's some films and some historical things that talk about Radu in a different light than Vlad, of course. But, sort of jumping ahead as using that as, growing up under that Ottoman influence. And when he is finally out of there and heads back home, he has a real hate on for them at this point.
As he should. I mean, I don't think he was wrong to do so. I kind of agree with him on this.
Well, Ian, for you, what is the interesting part of Vlad's life? Like, I'm talking in terms of, do you find him more interesting from the stories that come later, or just
me?
More?
Ian, I'm sorry, Ian.
Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, for me, I find it's the whole Dracula um, legend, the
Right.
writing that Bram Stoker created based upon, at least from what we've all understood, based
Mm-hmm.
upon Vlad.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's what I find interesting. As you mentioned off the top, these days in Romania, he is still considered
Yes.
a very much revered national hero.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you also hear the other side of the stories where he's just this
Monster.
tyrannical
Right.
Yeah.
kind of
Well, that existed. He
person. Do you know
was
what I mean?
tyrannical, but it
Yeah.
was the reasons that he was tyrannical. That I mean, that was there was a reason he was called Vlad the Impaler, because that was his favorite
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
form of torture. And he was just he did everything he could to instill fear. You know, in the hearts of everyone. He was notorious for but it was all his enemies. We just want to clarify, everything
Yeah,
he
yeah,
did
it
was
was
against
not
his
the
enemies.
people of his area, right?
Right,
And the people that
exactly.
he had a beef with were the boyar, the boyars, the upper class, the upper class. And it
Yes.
seems funny because we think of him as this wealthy man and this person of means, but that class was much different towards
Mm-hmm.
even towards them, right? Because of what had happened to his father and what had happened to the family in general, the upper echelon of society did not view them in a good light.
Oh
So
no.
they didn't think highly of them. So, I think that he was more for the every person and not so much for the upper class,
Yeah.
which annoyed the upper class. But I also find it interesting that there seems to be a lot of myth around him too, right? And in terms of the Dracula story, of course, but also in terms of historically what happened and the numbers of people that he supposedly impaled and how he impaled, and the fact that he rolled his dining, out to the fields to watch tens of thousands of people suffering while he sat there and ate his dinner. Is that really true? Or is that another one of those things that just, becomes part of the myth of Vlad Tepes or Vlad Dracula? I've done a lot of research on this, and I find that while I'm sure there's always some truth, I do believe a lot of the numbers were greatly inflated
Saturated.
to
Yeah.
make him appear much more terrifying. And I think that was done a little bit, it was propaganda of the time. It worked in both directions. If the Ottomans heard about that, they were terrified. If his own people heard about that, they cheered, right? Yeah, we
Right.
killed this
It's
many
the
Ottomans.
equivalent of the British Robin Hood in a way. They
Yeah.
rob the poor, rob the rich for the poor. It's the same
But
kind of
yeah,
thing.
I mean, it's an age-old story of good versus evil, really. And then somewhere along the way, the good is influenced by the evil and becomes this
Right.
myth of this, this monster that becomes Dracula. And then Bram Stoker takes this history and takes advantage of the name, especially because it really was the name that he latched onto.
Dracula.
Yes, Dracula.
Yeah, Dracula,
That's right.
Dracula. And
Dracula.
that was really what propelled it, and also the Nosferatu, because that
Yes.
name is also associated with it. And that's an interesting term unto itself because it kind of means evil and bad and demon and blood sucking and all of those things. And so we now have this term that Bram Stoker has used, Nosferatu, plus and it's Nosfera, but Nosferatu. And then he's taken Vlad's name, Vlad Dracula, and made it into this creature based on some of these stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I do want to mention too, though, there's an Irish story as well about a king that kind of goes awry and drinks people's blood as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That Stoker would have probably taken that folklore, that tale, and merged it with the Vlad tale to get this creature that becomes, Count Dracula. So Ian, what did you find? Did you do some research on the correlation between Vlad Dracula's actual life, his Dracula's life, and then Bram Stoker's sort of building of this mythos, this monster for his book? Did you get a chance to look into that, or?
Well, there's, from what I've read, that it's Vlad, his life story, as we say, is based upon the creation of the book. But there have been historians and researchers that have gone into and really studied Bram Stoker's work within creating this book, and they actually say that it's only very loosely based on the Vlad story.
Yeah.
That there really isn't much more than just the idea behind what Vlad was that went into the book itself to create Dracula.
Like I said, I think it really was the name that he used more than anything to depict his creature, right? I think that the name, because let's face it, it's a pretty cool moniker.
Yes, it is. It just so happens to be.
The last name, Son of the Dragon, or
I know, isn't that epic?
Right? So, and so it's a kind of, it so fits with the time period too, right? That, that sort of Gothic, medieval, verging on the Renaissance.
Right.
You've got all of these things that come together and create this myth, this man, this actual man who goes on to become this myth and this monster. What I find really interesting, though, is all the things over the years that have been tied to Dracula or Vlad Tepes or, Vlad Dracula. Things like Bran Castle, which they market the heck out of in terms of got wine that was created in their vineyards.
Wow.
This Dracula wine.
Are you sure it's actually wine and not blood inside there?
I've never opened it, so
that's a good question.
It's supposedly wine, as far as I know. But I don't think they're bleeding villagers in the nearby vicinity for fill their bottles. But I find it interesting that the myth has become huge. There was also a story, and I couldn't find any truth to this. So it's a story, historical story, that claims that in 1476, Vlad's head was actually dunked into a barrel of honey and shipped to the Roman emperor at the time. Actually at that time, I believe it was I think it was Murad II, who was in charge of the Ottoman Empire. And he supposedly received Vlad's head in this barrel of honey to preserve it, and then stuck it on a pike outside the entrance to Constantinople to let people know that he had, conquered Vlad Dracula and the Dracula family, and that, they were the big heroes of the day. I couldn't find any actual historical proof of that. It's going back 600 years. But generally, when things like that happen, they show up in documents or documentation, and I was not able to find anything to that. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But I think the mystery is, too, we don't really know where Vlad ended up. There's rumors he's buried on an island by this little church, this chapel.
Right, nobody.
There's.
I've heard that before. Yeah, that he's buried in some churchyard somewhere.
Some little island chapel that his body was buried in, and whether he was decapitated or not is, something we won't know unless we really find his body, right? But there's all these other tales that go with it too, like his wife plunging to her death from the ramparts of the castle because she was so distraught over him losing his life and all of these things. And again, there doesn't seem to be any real records for these
Can't seem to
things,
find
right?
that. I couldn't find anything about his love life, really. Just more about his political actions. Yeah.
We know he had children. We know he was married. But we don't really have a lot of records to say what exactly happened to Vlad himself, outside of the fact that, you know, he did meet his end eventually at the hands of the Ottoman, but we don't really know where he ended up. And that's just the thing. It seems odd to me, because if the Ottoman had actually ended his life, I would have figured they would have, yes, indeed, taken his head or his entire body back to Constantinople and made quite a show of it.
You would think so.
Yeah.
You would think that, exactly. But I didn't find anything to say other than that, you know, moment of the head in the barrel of honey being shipped back to Murad II, so that he could put that on a pike in front of the gates of, you know, the city, the entrance to the city. But it's a sort of one of those stories where I think it's taken on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just like
absolutely.
It's really just taken on a life of its own as it's and even coming into the modern times. I mean, we are still talking about this man.
Here we are.
Right here we are talking.
Probably be flattered.
And you know who he was and what kind of person he was. We don't really know that, and that's sort of what I find interesting, is that we have a glimpse through his childhood, through his early sort of formidable years, and then we have a glimpse of, you know, when he was with the Ottomans, and then we have these stories that just become larger than life in terms of, you know, what he did in his country in Transylvania and, you know, with the Ottomans and that. And I mean, you have to kind of pick through those things and look for what seems most plausible, right? Like what seems more real, you know? Do you believe that he put a dining room table, a table out into the field and consumed his dinner while he watched the Ottomans riding on poles that, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's quite possible.
It's
right?
possible.
It was considered a leadership tactic. It was considered he was doing it deliberately to obviously disturb and terrify people into behaving. If they did that in one village, one person would run to the next and, you know, pass it on and say, look what he just did to this village. They're probably going to be a little compliant.
Because it was while he was, you know, sort of going at the aristocracy, I think that this was mostly Ottoman invaders who had come in that he was, you know, he was putting.
Yeah. For sure.
But you have to think about this too, right? This is one man we're talking about. And so he's one man commanding an army of men. Mm-hmm. So Vlad single-handedly did not do this, right? This would have been a military effort, of course, right? This is not, you know, Vlad is often talked about, but in terms of what we really see here, this was a military effort at that time to stop an invasion of people from another country. And I think that doesn't get talked about very much either, right? I was looking into how he was as a commander, as a general, if you want to call it, as someone who oversaw an army and gave instructions. And part of what I've read, he seems like he was indeed quite strategic and very, very brilliant in terms of what he set out to do. But I think that parts of what he did do failed him, as well as he, you know, as things moved forward for him. He was captured more than once, right? I believe it was 3 times he was actually captured by the Ottomans.
Well, he reclaimed his throne about 3 times.
You know,
so it must have been.
Well, I mean, obviously he was taken as a young teen, right, with his brother and his father. But then he was captured, and then he was captured again. So somewhere along the way, he was let go or escaped. Did anybody look that up to see what he did?
I think he was let go. Yeah, he was let go. He was actually let go to go back. Yeah. When his father, I did look it up. when his father,
right? I wanted to ask.
I did look it up. When his father passed away, which was in 1448, he was released to take his place on the Wallachian throne.
And that was the first time when he was a child. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then again later during some of these, you know, I don't want to call them wars, but skirmishes or you know, battles, he was again captured and let go. It's like, I think
that's what I was saying. There's so many back and forths. There was so many. He did not stop fighting, even till the end. He did not stop fighting for his country.
No, he didn't. And that's sort of the interesting thing with him. And I really can see how he developed into that heroic symbol for his people, right?
Yeah.
They needed somebody to stand up for them.
Yes,
and
exactly.
He was that guy. He
gave them hope.
Yeah, he gave them hope, and he also was against that aristocracy who was, you know, bleeding the I don't want to say peasantry, because I don't consider them peasantry, the everyday person, you know, dry essentially of food and you know, whatever little bits of money that they were making. It was quite a harsh environment then.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.